What would you do if Madonna walked into your wedding ceremony on September 15th, 1985? That's exactly what happened to two strangers in Queens, New York. What she did next wasn't just unexpected. It became the most magical moment in the history of St. Catherine's Chapel. And 40 years later, their granddaughter revealed why that one moment changed three generations of their family forever. It was a Saturday evening in New York City, and Madison Square Garden was buzzing with electric energy. Madonna was at the absolute peak of her Like a Virgin era, selling out every show on her first major concert tour. That night was no different. 20,000 fans had paid top dollar to see the Material Girl do what she did best. But what nobody knew was that in a small Catholic chapel in Queens, just 30 minutes away from Manhattan, something much more intimate was taking place. A young couple, David and Sarah Martinez, were about to get married. They weren't wealthy, they weren't famous. They were just two kids in love who had saved every penny they had to afford a simple ceremony in Queens. David was 26 years old, a mechanic from Brooklyn. Sarah was 23, a waitress at a diner with dreams bigger than her bank account. They had $400 to their name, and they'd spent $200 of it just to rent the chapel for 1 hour. There was no band, no singer, no fancy decorations. Just a small room with 12 wooden chairs, a simple altar, and Father Murphy, who had already performed 4 weddings that day. Sarah's best friend Linda had taken the subway from Manhattan to be there. David had no family present. His parents had passed away in a car accident 3 years earlier, and his sister was serving in the Peace Corps in Guatemala. This wedding was supposed to be quiet, simple, and quick. Get married, take a few photos with Linda's Polaroid camera, and head back to their studio apartment in Brooklyn. That was the plan. But sometimes the universe has different ideas. Madonna had finished her first show at Madison Square Garden at 7:30 p.m. and had 2 hours before her second performance at 10 p.m. She usually spent that time in her dressing room, going over choreography with her dancers and maybe calling her brother Christopher. But that night, Madonna was restless. She decided to take a drive through the city, something she rarely did without her security team. She was traveling in a simple black sedan, not her usual limousine, trying to blend in. Madonna liked observing real life when she could escape the spotlight. It reminded her of her early days in New York, before the fame, when she was just another struggling artist from Michigan trying to make it in the big city. But here's what nobody could have predicted. As Madonna's driver took a wrong turn trying to avoid traffic, they ended up on a quiet street in Queens. And that's when Madonna noticed something that stopped her cold. Near the steps of St. Catherine's Chapel, she saw a young woman in a simple white dress. She was crying, not the happy tears you see at weddings, but the kind of tears that come from deep disappointment. Standing next to her was a young man in a suit that was clearly borrowed and didn't fit quite right. He was trying to comfort her, but he looked just as devastated. Madonna rolled down her window. The September air was cool, and she could hear their conversation clearly. "I'm sorry, David," the woman was saying, her voice breaking. "I know you wanted to give me more. I know you wanted music and dancing and everything special, but this is enough. You're enough." Those words hit Madonna like lightning. In that instant, she wasn't the Material Girl anymore. She was Louise Ciccone from Bay City, Michigan, remembering her mother's death when she was just 5 years old. She remembered her father working multiple jobs, trying to keep their family afloat. She remembered her own wedding dress hanging in a thrift store window that she couldn't afford, back when she was nobody special. She saw herself in that moment, remembering all the times she'd had to make do with less, all the dreams that seemed too expensive, all the moments when love had to be enough because it was all they had. She remembered her first apartment in New York, where she'd eaten peanut butter sandwiches for weeks just to afford dance classes. She remembered the nights she'd cried herself to sleep, wondering if she'd ever make it, if anyone would ever believe in her dreams. But most of all, she remembered the people who had helped her along the way. The dance instructor who gave her free lessons when she couldn't pay. The club owner who let her perform even when she didn't have the right look. The strangers who had shown kindness when she needed it most. Now here she was, with more money than she'd ever dreamed of, more fame than she'd ever imagined, and two young people standing in front of her who reminded her of everything she used to be. This wasn't about publicity or image. This was about paying forward the kindness that had once saved her own dreams. That's when Madonna made a decision that would change 4 lives forever. "Stop the car," she told her driver. "Miss, we need to get you back to MSG soon," he replied, concerned. "Stop the car, Tony, right here." Madonna stepped out of the sedan and walked directly up to the couple. David and Sarah looked up, startled. For a moment, they didn't recognize her. They were too consumed by their own emotions. But when Madonna spoke, her voice cut through their despair like sunlight. "Excuse me," Madonna said gently. "I couldn't help but notice you two look like you're about to do something really important." Sarah's eyes went wide. She grabbed David's arm so hard he winced. "Oh my God, David, that's Madonna." David stammered. "Miss Madonna, ma'am, we're sorry if we're bothering anyone. We were just—" Madonna smiled, and in that moment, she wasn't the material girl or the controversial pop star. She was just a woman who understood heartbreak and hope in equal measure. "You're not bothering anyone at all," Madonna said. "In fact, I think I'm the one who might be intruding. Am I right in assuming you two are about to get married?" Sarah nodded, tears still streaming down her face. "Yes, ma'am. In about 10 minutes, right here in St. Catharines." Madonna looked at Sarah's dress. Beautiful but clearly homemade. She looked at David's suit, then at Linda standing awkwardly behind them, holding a small bouquet of daisies that looked like they'd been bought at a bodega. "And let me guess," Madonna said, her voice growing softer. "You're doing this without all the fancy stuff. No band, no singer, just you two and love." David felt embarrassed. The most famous woman in the world was standing in front of them, and here they were, two nobodies who couldn't even afford a proper wedding. "We don't have much money, Miss Madonna," David said quietly, "but we have each other. That's what matters." Madonna put her hand on David's shoulder, and her touch was surprisingly gentle. "You know what, David? You're absolutely right. That is what matters most." She paused, looking between the two of them. "But here's the thing. I grew up in Michigan with nothing. I know what it's like to want to give someone you love the world, but only have pocket change in your purse." Sarah was crying again, but these were different tears. "I also know," Madonna continued, "that sometimes when you least expect it, a little magic shows up. And I can't think of a better way to spend the next hour than making sure you two have a wedding you'll never forget." The silence that followed felt like the whole world had stopped breathing. You want to be at our wedding?" Sarah finally managed to whisper. "I don't just want to be at your wedding," Madonna said with that famous smile. "I want to sing at your wedding, if you'll have me." David couldn't speak. Sarah covered her mouth with both hands. Linda dropped the bouquet and the daisies scattered across the sidewalk. But you have a show," David said. 20,000 people are waiting for you." Madonna checked her diamond watch. "I've got time. And trust me, those 20,000 people will be fine. Right now, the only audience that matters is right here." What happened next became the stuff of legend among the small congregation at St. Catherine's Chapel. Madonna walked into that tiny church like she owned the place, which in a way she did. Her presence filled every corner of the small space. The late afternoon sunlight streaming through the stained glass windows seemed to spotlight her as she moved. Her hair was perfectly styled, her makeup flawless from the earlier show preparation, and she was wearing a simple but elegant black dress that probably cost more than David and Sarah's rent for 6 months. Father Murphy nearly dropped his Bible when he saw her. The few elderly parishioners who were there for evening prayer stared in shock. Mrs. O'Brien, who had been coming to St. Catherine's for 40 years, later told everyone who would listen that she thought she was having a religious vision. "Is that—" Father Murphy whispered to himself, adjusting his glasses. Madonna approached him with a smile that could melt ice. "Father, I hope you don't mind, but I'd like to sing for David and Sarah's wedding. I promise I'll behave myself in your house of worship." Father Murphy, a man who had seen everything in his 30 years of ministry, found himself starstruck. Of course, Miss Madonna. God's house welcomes all his children." The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Madonna, whose very name had caused controversy with religious groups, standing in a Catholic church, offering to bless a marriage with her voice. But there was something so genuine in her eyes, so pure in her intention, that any theological concerns melted away. Madonna didn't ask permission. She didn't make a grand announcement. She simply walked to the front of the church, positioned herself near the altar under a statue of the Virgin Mary, another Madonna, and nodded to David and Sarah. "All right, let's get you two married." The ceremony began. Father Murphy stumbled through his lines, clearly nervous with the Queen of Pop standing just feet away from him. David held Sarah's hands, both of them trembling, not just from nerves, but from the surreal magic of the moment. Linda sat in the front pew, tears streaming down her face, unable to believe what was happening. And then came the moment that would be remembered for 4 decades. When Father Murphy said, "You may kiss the bride," Madonna began to sing. She sang "Crazy for You" without a microphone, without a band, without anything except her voice and her heart. But this wasn't the polished, produced version that millions knew from the radio. This was stripped down, raw, intimate. Her voice echoed off the stone walls and wooden pews, creating a natural reverb that made every note feel like it was coming directly from heaven. The acoustics in that small church made her voice sound ethereal, like an angel had descended just for David and Sarah. Madonna closed her eyes as she sang, and for those few minutes, she wasn't performing for anyone but God and two people in love. Every word was filled with such genuine emotion that it didn't feel like a performance. It felt like a prayer. Swaying room as the music starts, strangers making the most of the dark. As Madonna sang, something magical happened in that little church. David, who had been nervous and worried about money and whether Sarah deserved better, felt all his fears melt away. In that moment, listening to one of the most famous voices in the world singing just for them, he realized that love really was enough. Sarah, who had been heartbroken about not having the wedding of her dreams, understood that this moment was more perfect than anything she could have imagined. Sarah buried her face in David's chest and sobbed. David held her tight, his own eyes filled with tears. Linda was openly weeping, trying to capture the moment with her Polaroid camera, but her hands were shaking too much to get a clear shot. Even Father Murphy had to pause and wipe his eyes. The elderly parishioners who had witnessed the whole thing sat in stunned silence, knowing they were part of something miraculous. Mrs. O'Brien later said, "In all my years of going to Mass, I never felt the presence of God stronger than I did when that young woman sang in our little church." When Madonna finished the song, the silence that followed was profound. For a moment, no one moved, no one spoke. It was as if the world had stopped to acknowledge what had just happened. When Madonna finished the song, she walked over to the newlyweds and took Sarah's hands in hers. "Congratulations, Mrs. Martinez. You've got yourself a good man. I can tell you two are going to be very happy." Then she turned to David and shook his hand firmly. "And you, David Martinez, you take care of this lady. She's a treasure." Sarah found her voice through her tears. "Madonna, I don't know how to thank you." Madonna smiled that smile that had launched 1,000 dreams. "You don't have to thank me, sweetheart. Just love each other. That's all the thanks I need." But then Madonna did something that nobody expected. She reached into her purse and pulled out her checkbook. She wrote something quickly and handed it to David. "Go have a nice honeymoon somewhere beautiful. On me." David looked at the check and nearly fainted. It was for $2,000, more money than he made in 3 months. "Madonna, we can't accept this," he protested. "Yes, you can," Madonna said firmly but kindly. "And you will. Consider it a wedding gift from someone who believes in love." Madonna walked out of that chapel as quietly as she had entered. She got back in her car, returned to Madison Square Garden, and performed the show of her life for 20,000 screaming fans. She never mentioned the incident to her band, her management, or the press. She didn't use it for publicity. She just did it because it felt right. David and Sarah Martinez left St. Catherine's Chapel that night in a daze. They used Madonna's money to take a honeymoon in the Bahamas, something they never could have dreamed of affording. For 7 days, they sat on beaches, swam in crystal clear water, and talked about what had happened. "Do you think anyone will believe us?" Sarah asked one evening as they watched the sunset. David laughed. "Probably not. But we know what happened. That's all that matters." But here's the incredible part of this story, the part that nobody knew until 40 years later. Madonna's act of kindness didn't just give them a beautiful memory. It changed the entire trajectory of their lives. That night in the Bahamas, David and Sarah made a promise to each other. They promised they would never forget what Madonna had done for them, and they promised that whenever they had the chance, they would do the same kind of thing for someone else. Over the next 4 decades, David and Sarah Martinez became known in their Brooklyn community as the couple who helped everyone. They paid for strangers' groceries when they saw someone counting pennies at the checkout. They helped young couples with wedding expenses. They donated to every charity that knocked on their door. They opened their home to people who needed a place to stay. Their children grew up watching this behavior and adopted it themselves. Their grandchildren learned the same values. The ripple effect of what Madonna did in that chapel on September 15th, 1985 spread across 3 generations, like waves across a pond. But David and Sarah never told anyone the full story. Not their children, not their friends, not even Father Murphy years later when he asked about that night. They kept Madonna's kindness as their own private treasure, something sacred between the two of them and God. Until September 15th, 2025. On their 40th wedding anniversary, David and Sarah's family threw them a huge celebration at a community center in Brooklyn. Their children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren all gathered to celebrate a marriage that had lasted 4 decades and seemed to grow stronger every year. During the party, their granddaughter Sophia stood up to give a speech. Sophia was 22, a social media manager with a TikTok following, and she'd grown up hearing stories about her grandparents' incredible generosity. "I never understood where Grandma and Grandpa learned to be so giving," Sophia said to the crowd. "They always just said it was the right thing to do. But last week, while helping Grandma organize some old photos for tonight's slideshow, I found something that made everything make sense." Sophia had been going through a shoebox of old photographs looking for pictures to scan for the anniversary video when she came across a Polaroid that didn't seem to fit with the others. It was from 1985, clearly taken by an amateur. The lighting was off, the focus wasn't perfect, but there, unmistakably, was a woman with short blonde hair standing next to her grandparents in what looked like a church. At first, Sophia didn't think much of it, but something about the woman's profile, the way she held herself, seemed familiar. Sophia took a closer look and nearly dropped the photo. That hair, that face, that unmistakable presence. It was Madonna. Madonna in her grandparents' wedding photo from 1985. "Grandma," Sophia had asked that day, holding up the photo with trembling hands, "is this who I think it is?" Sarah had looked at the photo, and for the first time in years, Sophia saw her tough, pragmatic grandmother's eyes fill with tears. "Oh my," Sarah had whispered. "I'd forgotten Linda managed to take that picture. We never developed most of our film from that day. We didn't have the money. But Linda, sweet Linda, developed this one and gave it to us years later." Sophia pulled out her phone and showed the enhanced photo to the crowd. It was that same grainy Polaroid from 1985, now digitized and filtered to make the faces clearer than they'd ever been. "So I asked Grandma about it," Sophia continued, her voice getting emotional. "And she told me a story that I had to share with all of you tonight." Sarah stood up, tears already streaming down her face. David, now 66 and using a walking stick after a recent hip surgery, stood beside her. For the first time in 40 years, they told the complete story of what Madonna had done for them. The room fell completely silent. Some people cried. Some people laughed in amazement. But everyone finally understood why David and Sarah had spent their entire lives giving to others. "Madonna didn't just sing at our wedding," David said, his voice still strong despite his age. "She taught us what it means to be truly generous. She didn't do it for cameras or publicity. She did it because she saw 2 kids who needed a little magic, and she had the power to provide it." Sarah added, "Every time we helped someone over the years, every time we gave when we didn't have much to give ourselves, we thought about that night. We thought about Madonna standing in that little church, singing with all her heart for an audience of 3 people and a priest." Sophia posted the story on TikTok that night, but she never expected what happened next. The video went viral within hours. By morning, it had 1 million views. By the end of the week, it had been shared across every social media platform, covered by entertainment news shows, and discussed on talk radio across the country. The comments poured in from people sharing their own stories of unexpected kindness. Musicians talked about times they'd helped fans. Fans shared stories of celebrities who had changed their lives with small gestures. But most importantly, ordinary people began sharing stories of how they'd been inspired to help strangers. Your grandparents' story made me pay for the groceries for the family behind me at the store today, wrote one commenter. I've been struggling financially, but after reading this, I donated $20 to a local family in need. It wasn't much, but it felt right, wrote another. This story reminded me that we all have the power to be someone's miracle, added a third. News outlets picked it up. Entertainment journalists researched it. Former staff members from Madison Square Garden came forward with their own memories. One former sound engineer said, I remember Madonna coming back that night before her second show. She had this glow about her, like she'd just experienced something beautiful. She kept humming Crazy for You to herself during soundcheck. Today, St. Catherine's Chapel still stands in Queens, though Father Murphy passed away years ago. The current priest, Father Rodriguez, keeps a small plaque near the altar that reads, In this place, love multiplied on September 15, 1985. The story of Madonna and the Martinez wedding reminds us that true generosity isn't about grand gestures for the cameras. It's about seeing a moment where you can make a difference in choosing to act, even when nobody's watching except God. Madonna never publicized what she did that night. In 40 years, she never mentioned it in interviews. She never used it to boost her image. She simply did it because it was the right thing to do. And that perhaps more than any song she ever sang or any boundary she ever broke is the real legacy of Madonna. She showed us that everybody needs somebody, and sometimes somebody can be you. Today, the Martinez family continues the tradition Madonna started that night. They've helped over 200 families with wedding expenses, paid countless grocery bills for struggling neighbors, and opened their hearts to anyone in need. David still works part-time at the auto shop, not because he needs the money, but because he loves helping people fix things that are broken. Sarah volunteers at the local food bank every Tuesday, always remembering what it felt like to count pennies. Their children learned by example. Their son Miguel became a social worker. Their daughter Rosa runs a nonprofit that helps young couples get started in life. Their grandchildren carry on the tradition. Sophia uses her social media platform to highlight people in need, while her cousin David Jr. organizes high school to adopt families every Christmas, because that's what Madonna taught them that night in a little church in Queens. Love multiplies when you give it away. Kindness creates kindness. And sometimes one spontaneous act of generosity can ripple through generations. Sophia Martinez ended her viral TikTok with these words, My grandparents taught me that you don't have to be famous or rich to change someone's life. You just have to care enough to act when you see someone who needs a little magic. And somewhere, maybe Madonna is smiling, knowing that one spontaneous act of kindness 40 years ago is still creating ripples of love across the world. The material girl discovered that night that the most precious things in life can't be bought. They can only be given away.